My name is Charlotte Beaumont-Field and I work at QCOS as a Sector Development Officer, specifically for human rights. And today's Human Rights Network meeting will be about supporting victims' rights, which is obviously very closely linked to the Human Rights Act. Before I get any further, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians on the land on which we are facilitating this webinar, the Turrbal and Yagara peoples. I would like to pay my respects to elders past and present, and I especially welcome and pay respect to all First Nations people joining us on the line today. It'd be wonderful if you could take a moment using the chat function to let us know on which traditional lands you're dialing in from. It's a really lovely way to acknowledge the breadth of country and connection to land of our First Nations peoples, and to acknowledge that we meet on stolen land and that sovereignty was never ceded. So we are obviously talking about the rights of victims of crime today. And I just wanted to bring everyone's attention to how closely connected the Human Rights Act of Queensland and the Victims of Crime Charter, how connected that they both are. Both of them aim to uphold the dignity, safety and rights of individuals, especially vulnerable people such as victim survivors of crime. The Human Rights Act includes rights that directly relate to experience of crime victims. For example, Section 15, Section 17, Section 25, 26 and 31. The Victims Charter is a policy framework and guides best practice, while the Human Rights Act is legislation. Therefore, victims can raise a human rights complaint with the Queensland Human Rights Commission if they believe their rights have been breached. The Charter and the Human Rights Act are used to strengthen advocacy for victims. So I just wanted to really highlight how both of those frameworks really complement each other, and both are so very important in this human rights landscape. I'm very excited today because we have three wonderful guest speakers. First, we'll be introduced by Beck O'Connor, who's Queensland's first Victims Commissioner. We will then be fortunate enough to have some question and answer time with Beck. After this, we will be joined by Jane Barrett and Victoria Reid from Wild. And again, we'll have some opportunities to have some questions and answers from Wild. As I said, we will be joined by three wonderful individuals today. Firstly, I would like to introduce Beck O'Connor. Beck O'Connor is Queensland's first Victims Commissioner and a long-time advocate for victim survivors of crime. She has extensive experience leading health, mental health, child protection and domestic, family and sexual violence services across Australia. A passionate survivor leader, Beck was a founding member of the National DVSV Lived Advisory Council for the For Domestic, Family and Sexual Violence Commission, and the co-founder of the LGBTQ Domestic Violence Awareness Foundation. Prior to her appointment, Beck was the CEO of DV Connect, where she led key initiatives including the launch of Victim Connect, a 24/7 support service for victims of violent crime and early intervention for people using violence in their relationships. So without further ado, I will hand over to Beck O'Connor, who will be discussing the Charter of Victims' Rights and other things today. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, Beck. We really appreciate your time.
Good morning, and thank you, Charlotte, and everyone who has taken some time out to talk about this really important topic that's obviously dear to my heart. Amongst all of you, I'm also joined by Dimity Toms, who is our Director of Policy and Systemic Review here at the Office of the Victims Commissioner, and Dean Corliss, who's the Acting Executive Director. So they're as my wing people should you have some questions that they might be able to help me with after the presentation. So first off, I would like to, next slide, thanks Charlotte. So I would like to pay my respects to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander ancestors of this land, their spirits and their legacy. The foundations laid by these ancestors, our First Nations peoples, give strength, inspiration, and courage to future and current generations towards creating a better Queensland. I would also like to pay my respects to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander colleagues online with us today, acknowledging that if you're here, you're taking out time to be here during a week of celebration and activism. For the purposes, so I would also, next slide, thanks. I would also like to recognise adults, young people and children who have been victims of crime. For the purposes of talking about my role and the responsibilities under the legislation and the Charter of Victims' Rights, I will be referring to victim survivors mostly as victims or victims of crime throughout our conversation this morning. I mean no disrespect to survivors that are joining us here today, because I know that you are much more than what has happened to you. So today we're going to be covering off 4 major kind of areas. So there's the role and functions of the Victims Commissioner. This is on the next slide. Thanks, Charlotte. We'll be covering victims' rights in Queensland, the Charter of Victims' Rights itself, and a review of the Charter that I'll be undertaking this year and into next year. So I'm just about to hit 1 year in the role, and I suspect that I've had the privilege of meeting with most of you that are online today. But just in case, I wanted to give you first an introduction to me and the Victim Commissioner role, and I'll just take a minute to go through some of that background. So this role and the team of people, extraordinary people who are in my office who support me, we've got a powerful mandate, and that's to promote and protect the rights of victims of crime and to ensure that they are seen, that they are heard, and that they are helped. There's already a significant roadmap of reform that's been shaped by the voices of victim survivors, and my role is to be here to oversee that those insights turn into positive impact, ones that, you know, victims of crime deserve. So my role was established under the Victim Commissioner and Sexual Violence Review Board Act 2024. So that was in May last year. And my role has the authority to identify systemic issues affecting victims, handle complaints related to the Charter of Victims' Rights, and I can recommend changes to policies, practices, and procedures to government and non-government services. But my role isn't just about identifying barriers, it's also about spotlighting the positive, game-changing innovations that are happening in this space. And I'm fully aware of the positive momentum that's already happening across Queensland, led by a lot of organisations who are on the line today. I see my role as amplifying these efforts alongside advice and feedback and direction from victim survivors about what their priorities are. So my functions include a remit to conduct independent research and to publish insights on the justice system's impact on victims. I'm here to provide frank and fearless advice to government, to the government of the day, and to advocate and to inspire a system where victims are met with meaningful and tangible support. I believe personally in transparency, and I commit to ensuring that my recommendations are data-driven, that they are ethical, that they're balanced and are reasonable. So over the next 4 years, I'll monitor the implementation of any recommendations I make to ministers and to individual agencies, ensuring accountability and transparency in how this advice is both considered and is used. Excuse me. So my role as Victims Commissioner is deliberately broad. It's not limited to one type of offence or to one group of people, although I must have particular regard to victims who have characteristics that may make them particularly vulnerable to harm. So, for example, that could be children, victims with disability and older people. Just on to the next slide. Thanks, Charlotte. So I'm here to promote and protect the rights and needs of all survivors of crime in Queensland, no matter the nature of the offence or who the victim is. So that also includes non-violent offences like property crime, fraud, or stalking, for instance. So the reality is that anyone at any time can become a victim of crime. And when that happens, they deserve to be treated with fairness, dignity and support, regardless of the type of offence, their background or previous experiences they may have had with the criminal justice system. It's also important to remember that victim survivors are not all the same. So they are different people with different experiences, needs, and ideas about what justice means for them. So for some, seeing the offender punished is really important. For others, it's more about understanding why the offence happened, especially if the offender is someone that they know or they have a relationship with. Some victim survivors want to be part of a restorative justice process because they want to ask questions, they want to find meaning or get some closure. Others would never want that. So there's no one right way to respond to harm, and we shouldn't expect that every victim would want the same thing. So a rights-based criminal justice and support approach needs to be flexible and respectful. And that's a big part of my role, is to help make sure that all victim survivors are seen, they're heard and supported in a way that actually works for them. So, victims' rights in Queensland. I thought it might be important to briefly touch on the early advocacy and development of victims' rights in Queensland, because this has been happening over the last 30 years. So on the next slide, I've got a timeline. So it kind of started around 1995. The Criminal Offence Victims Act, or the COVA Act of 1995, this was the first time that it included fundamental principles of justice for victims of crime, and it was to advance the interests and guide officials in their dealings with victims. So the explanatory notes for this bill back then acknowledged the United Nations Declaration of Basic Principles of Justice for Victims of Crime and Abuse of Power. And this was off the back of growing international recognition of the needs of victims. In 2009 was when the Victims of Crime Assistance Act, or what we know as VOCA, replaced the repealed COVA Act. So it retained the fundamental, so in 2009, it retained the fundamental principles of justice for victims, but it did introduce a complaints mechanism for breaches by government entities. So moving forward onto 2017, the VOCA Act was amended and it replaced the fundamental principles of justice with what we now know as the Charter of Victims' Rights. So this followed a 2015 review, a Victims of Crime review report, which had recommended strengthening the original principles to better support victims. So the Charter as it exists at the moment is what was introduced in 2017. So in 2022, the Women's Safety Justice Task Force found in their report that the Charter lacked accessibility, it lacked enforceability, and it lacked inclusivity, especially for women and girls in the justice system. So it recommended a review of the Charter to better reflect victims' needs and their diverse needs. It suggested to improve accountability of agencies and to ensure that victims' rights are upheld in practice. So the former government, excuse me, accepted these recommendations, and the current government remains committed to their implementation. In 2023, there was a Legal Affairs and Safety Committee inquiry into support provided to victims of crime, and it also recommended a review of the Charter, and this was to determine whether or not additional rights should be recognised, whether existing rights could be strengthened or clarified, and how common victim complaints that had been received, and at that time were received through Victims Assist Queensland, could guide better sector training. So then in May 2024 was when the Victim Commissioner and the Sexual Violence Review Board Act was passed, which relocated the Charter unamended. So it brought the Charter over without amendments from the VOCA Act into Schedule 1 of the Act that I operate under. The legislation also established my role, and that was to be an independent statutory officer to promote and protect victims' rights. So in September of last year, the new complaints receiving and handling function under this Act came into effect. So I could then effectively start taking complaints from people who were concerned that their rights were not upheld. And then in February of this year, I announced the Charter review. So noting that the review aligns with the functions that I have to be able to identify and review systemic issues relating to victims of crime. So the Charter Review, aims to ensure that it effectively promotes and protects the rights of diverse victims of crime in line with the recommendations of the Women's Safety Justice Task Force and the Legal Affairs and Safety Committee. It was also a recommendation within the Commission of Inquiry into police responses to domestic and family violence. So let me briefly walk you through the purpose and the scope of the Charter of Victims' Rights. So the scope and the purpose is set out in Section 41 of the Victims Commissioner and Victim Services and Rights Act. So the Victims Commissioner Act. So the purpose of the Charter is twofold. So firstly, it's to advance the interests of victims by clearly stating the rights that government and funded services must observe when they're interacting with victims of crime. And secondly, it's to inform victims to help them understand what they can reasonably expect when they engage with the criminal justice and support systems. So in other words, it's both a standard for practice and a guide for victims. It sets expectations and helps people understand their rights. The scope of the Charter is equally as important. So it applies to a specific group of people known under the Act as either affected victims and eligible persons. So that's those who have been directly harmed by crime, as well as certain family members and representatives. So on the other side, excuse me, I'm recovering from the flu, so I apologise for the coughs. But on the other side, it also applies to a group of service providers and agencies that are referred to as prescribed persons. So this includes government departments and agencies such as the police, the courts and prosecutors, and non-government organisations that are funded to provide services to victims of crime. So that includes services that are working in domestic, family and sexual violence, where we know that the rights and needs of victims are especially complex and urgent. So one of the goals of the current Charter Review is to clarify exactly who is covered by these obligations, especially in relation to non-government providers, to contracted services and to community-based orgs. So getting this right's essential, because if we're not clear on who must observe the Charter, then it becomes really difficult to ensure it's consistently applied and that it is enforced. So I've just got a little video here. Charlotte, if you wouldn't mind, this is a video that's available on the website, victimscommissioner.qld.gov.au. That is a really good tool for high level, easy to understand around victims' rights, but also good for people that you might be working with. It's a couple of minutes, so if we wouldn't mind playing it, I'd appreciate that. So the rights contained in the Charter fall under awkward, there's a picture of me. The rights contained in the Charter fall under 4 categories. So they are general rights, such as the right to be treated with respect and dignity, the right to privacy, and the right to be given information about available support services and what can be done in response to the crime. There's rights in the criminal justice system, such as the right to be kept informed of the progress of a police investigation and any prosecution, rights when attending court as a witness, the right to make a victim impact statement, commonly referred to as a VIS, for the court to consider during sentencing if an offender is found guilty, and the right to have the property that may have been taken as evidence returned to you. There's also rights when an offender is sentenced to imprisonment or detention, so such as a victim's right to be kept informed of an offender's period of imprisonment or detention, if an offender is transferred or escapes from custody, and the right to have an opportunity to make a submission to the parole board. You also have the right to make a complaint about a charter right not being upheld. So the slide that you're looking at the moment is also what is contained within the legislation in terms of who a victim of crime is. So a victim under the Charter is a person who has suffered harm because a violent crime was committed against them as an individual, that they're a family member or someone they are dependent on has died or suffered harm because of the violent crime. They're a family member of an unborn baby who died as a result of violent crime, or you've intervened to help a person who has died or suffered harm because of a violent crime. There's also what a violent crime includes and also what the meaning of harm is within the Act. I think what's really important to point out here is that the Charter itself in its current form does not consider non-violent crime or crimes that weren't against the person. So it does not cover a victim of property crime. It also does not cover a person who commits a relevant offence or domestic and family violence against a person. So a key part of my role and one of the newer functions under the legislation is the ability to receive and respond to complaints, feedback, and inquiries about victims' rights. This function is an important step towards accountability and visibility. It gives victim survivors, their families, and advocates a way to raise concerns when they feel their rights under the Charter haven't been upheld. It also gives service providers and professionals a place to seek clarification, share insights, or raise systemic issues that they're seeing on the ground. And I've heard from a number of agencies and advocates who have come to me directly through the office where they want to raise concerns. So here's how the function kind of works in practice. Victims or their representatives can make a complaint or inquiry directly to the office, and there's a number of ways that people can do that, and we'll send out that at the end of the presentation. We can look into whether the Charter of Victims' Rights applies to their situation. Where needed and with their consent, we can contact the agency or the service that's involved. We can seek information and a response to their concerns. And what's really important, so Charlotte spoke at the beginning about sort of the Human Rights Commission and an ability to be able to raise a complaint there. What's unique about raising a complaint under the Charter of Victims' Rights is that you don't have to have reported the crime for there to have been a barrier to you claiming your rights as a victim of crime. So you can come and make a complaint or an inquiry or give feedback directly, whether you've reported the harm that's happened to you or not. Similarly, unlike other commissions like the Human Rights Commission, you don't need to go to the agency that you're wanting to make a complaint about before you come here. So if, for instance, you're wanting to make a complaint about your experience, or a victim of crime is wanting to make a complaint about an experience with the police, they don't need to go to the police first. They can come directly here. And that's often because people are concerned about any impacts that may have on an impending investigation, or, or may even want to come anonymously and not give us their details if they want to raise a concern. So I can also make recommendations, excuse me, to that relevant agency based on what we've gone through in that complaint. And I can then monitor when those recommendations, whether those recommendations are acted upon. Importantly, I think it's not just a complaints function or to see it just as a complaints function. It's a way to build a clearer picture of where things are working well and where systems are falling short. It helps inform my systemic review work, and it gives us a more grounded understanding of victim survivors' experiences in practice, not just in policy. We work really hard here to manage expectations of victims in relation to the role of the Office of the Victims Commissioner, because we're not a crisis service and we cannot offer any ongoing case management or individual advocacy to victims. We don't provide counselling, and we're not a referral service. However, though, if somebody does come to us and there is somewhere that we can pass on or connect them with for any of their other needs, then we will certainly try our best to do that. Since September last year, when the function was fully commenced, we've seen significant engagement from victim survivors, their families, advocates and services who are calling on their behalf as well. So this tells me a number of things. It says that there is a growing awareness of rights of victims of crime and a strong commitment from the government to prioritise the needs of victims. It tells me that people need an independent pathway to raise concerns about how they're being treated, and that many are struggling to have their rights recognised and respected across different parts of the criminal justice system. So thinking about the rights of victims has real-world power, not just to exist in legislation, but because it can outline what justice, fairness, and healing should look like for people who've experienced violent crime. The value of a rights framework becomes really clear when we look at what victim survivors consistently say they need after a violent crime. These needs are fairly consistent across different communities, but how they are experienced and whether they're met often depends on who the victim is. What is their relationship to the person who committed that crime, the harm that they've experienced, their role in the incident, and what I mean by that is whether or not they're directly impacted or they're a family member, the intersecting structural inequalities that they may face, previous experiences they've had with the criminal justice system, including their own criminalisation, where they're located, and the ability to access supports that are appropriate for their needs. To understand its significance, especially for people impacted by domestic and family violence, those from culturally linguistically diverse communities and First Nations people, it's imperative that we ask what victim survivors actually need when they engage with systems after harm. So I've grouped these needs into 6 sort of broad areas of need, and I'll walk you through each because they represent not only an opportunity to reflect on how a rights framework can respond to real world needs, but how this is important for your work. So respect and recognition. So everything begins here. Victim survivors have the right to be treated with respect, dignity, and compassion, regardless of their background, identity, or circumstances. But many tell us that they're not believed, that they're judged, or that they are treated like an inconvenience rather than the person in crisis. This is especially true for those who don't fit an ideal victim narrative. Recognition isn't just symbolic. It directly affects whether someone feels safe to disclose, seek help, or persist in the justice process. So the Charter sets a clear expectation that every victim survivor deserves to be treated as a person whose experience matters. So safety and prevention of further harm. So one of the most immediate and urgent needs is to be protected from further violence. For victim survivors of domestic and family violence, for instance, this may mean being informed about bail conditions that are actually being enforced. It might mean being informed about safe housing. It might mean police responses that are not just fast, but that are trauma-informed. Yet too often, survivors tell us that they feel more at risk after reporting, whether from the perpetrator or from a system that doesn't take their safety seriously. So the Charter affirms a right to receiving information which affects victim survivor safety. But in practice, we need a whole of system response to make that more assured. So culturally safe and trauma-informed justice experiences, because true justice is not one size fits all. Victim survivors need systems that understand and reflect their cultural context and their lived experience. So for culturally linguistically diverse communities, that includes access to interpreters, culturally appropriate services, and safety, excuse me, from racism or stereotyping. For First Nations people, it can include recognition of intergenerational trauma and culturally led support pathways. If a system itself is unsafe, emotionally, culturally, or practically, then rights don't reach people that they're meant to protect. Trauma-informed, culturally safe responses are not an optional add-on, and they are central to upholding a victim's right by taking into account their needs. Rights must be supported in practice, not just in theory. So victim survivors often need legal advice, housing assistance, counselling, and system navigation support. This is where victim advocates and support workers play a really vital role, yet the consistency and accessibility of these supports vary widely. For example, people on temporary visas often have limited or no access to mainstream services. Victims of domestic and family violence may be managing multiple systems, so police, courts, child protection, with no one to guide them. The Charter affirms their right to be told about support services and remedies available to them. It recognises that they may need help and not just to be left to manage alone. Accurate and timely information notification. This would have to be one of the most consistent gaps that I hear about. Victim survivors are entitled to know what's happening in their case, who has been charged, what offences they've been charged with, details of relevant court processes, outcomes of criminal proceedings, whether bail has been granted or whether an offender is released. But too often this information doesn't come or it arrives too late. For many, not being informed is experienced as a secondary betrayal, a sign that the system doesn't see them as a participant, but just a bystander. So the Charter recognises that access to timely, accurate information is essential for agency, for safety, and for trust. And finally, victim survivors have a need for harm that they've experienced to be acknowledged and redressed. Harm from crime is rarely just emotional or physical, it's also practical. So it disrupts lives, it damages homes, it destroys financial stability, and it can leave lasting psychological impacts. Yet many victims are unaware of their options or entitlements and struggle to access schemes like Victims Assist or the victim impact statements. A rights-based system must acknowledge the full extent of harm and provide pathways to meaningful recovery. So when we talk victims' rights, we aren't just talking in abstract. We're talking about real expectations of people who've already experienced violence and harm and who are looking to a system and importantly to you as practitioners and policymakers, not just for justice, but for support, for safety and for fairness. So if the Charter outlines what victim survivors should be able to expect, then what's getting in the way? So on the next slide, across the board, we're seeing some systemic and consistent challenges that limit its effectiveness and ultimately its impact on people's lives. So first is visibility. Many victim survivors and even service providers don't know that the Charter exists. It's not being routinely explained, embedded in practice, or made accessible in plain language, in multiple languages or First Nations contexts. So if people don't know their rights, they can't claim them. And if frontline workers and agencies aren't trained on the Charter, then they can't uphold them. So in the beginning of 2024, there was an informal engagement survey that was conducted by the Interim Victims Commissioner, so John Rouse, who came in to help set up the Office of the Victims Commissioner before I was permanently appointed. So there was a survey and some listening conversations excuse me, with service providers and with victim survivors directly, and most indicated that they weren't aware of the Charter of Victims' Rights. So that's kind of the basis that we're starting from. It's been my focus over the last 11 months to improve this awareness and more specifically to ensure the obligations of prescribed entities for victims of crime is understood and that they're being met. So while the Charter sets out clear rights, there are limited avenues for enforcement in its current form. So there is no structured conciliation process, there's no tribunal, and there's no binding authority to compel compliance across the system. However, the oversight framework has evolved since the implementation of my role as a Victims Commissioner. So under law, I can now receive and handle complaints from victim survivors when they believe that their rights under the Charter have been breached, as we've discussed. I can raise concerns directly with agencies with or without a complaint. And I monitor the responses and recommendations made to those agencies and to government when a complaint has been processed. In addition, all government agencies that receive a charter-related complaint are now required to report these in their annual report. So every government agency provides an annual report to Parliament, and they need to be able to detail how many complaints, what they were about, and how they were resolved, obviously in a de-identified way. So that creates a new level of transparency and public accountability that we've never had before. It's a step forward, but through a review of the Charter, we're considering where there's opportunity to improve these rights. And lastly, there's uneven application. So whether or not a victim survivor experiences their rights being respected often depends on who they interact with. So which individual police officer, which prosecutor, or which support service. That often creates a postcode lottery, and that's not a rights-based system approach. When things go wrong, when people fall through the cracks, it's rarely visible and it's not tracked. So the Office of Victims Commissioner is working on a clear feedback loop between individual experiences and systemic improvement. This will hopefully make it easier to identify patterns, provide evidence-based recommendations to government, and to monitor those improvements. So the Charter of Victims' Rights. Ooh.
Sorry, Beck, we seem to be missing some of your slides.
That's okay. I can
sorry
just
about that.
have a chat about
well,
it.
I'll update them for when we send out this presentation, but it looks like, yes, we're missing your last few slides on the Charter of Victims' Right Review.
No worries.
I'm very sorry about that.
That's okay. But given these challenges, it's clear that the Charter needs a careful, honest and forward-looking review. So the review I'm going to be undertaking will be the first review of the Charter of Victims' Rights in its current form since 2017. And I'm not intending this review to be light touch. As I'm hoping most of you would expect of me, I want this to be both transformative but grounded in what's realistically possible. So none of us are interested in recommendations that are going to sit on a shelf. I want the review to lead real lasting change, the kind that the government can actually deliver and that victim survivors can feel. It means being guided by people with deep expertise and personal investment, including those with lived experience, frontline workers, academics, and system reformers. The review won't start from scratch, importantly. It will build on many views and voices already shared through past inquiries, task force, and reports. And for me, it means being brave enough to face what's not working and committed enough to imagine what would. So I did have a slide that goes through the scope of the Charter review, but essentially it will be looking at, is the Charter working as it should? Are victims' rights truly visible, enforceable, and meaningful? And what would it take to ensure that they are? So we're going to look at the objects of the Charter, the scope of the Charter, how it's applied, how it operates in practice. Is it accessible? What's awareness and understanding of the Charter like? And where are opportunities for innovation to protect and promote the rights of victims? Importantly, though, what's out of scope is that it will it's not incorporating the Human Rights Act, as this has been considered was considered in an independent Human Rights Act review. It's not going to be reviewing the financial assistance scheme, which is administered through Victims Assist Queensland. It won't review the reach, capacity, capability, or funding of the service systems, so those that are funded to provide support to victims of crime. It won't duplicate the function of other bodies or duplicate the work of recent reviews or inquiries. And it's not about intervening in individual cases and individual advocacy. But as we move into the next stage of review, I want to extend an open invitation for you all to participate. There'll be multiple ways to get involved, whether that's providing written input, attending community consultations that we'll be holding, or speaking directly with us. We're committed to making sure the information about the review and how to participate is available in accessible formats and across multiple formats. It is also for victim survivors themselves, of course, for family members, advocates and professionals to contribute to. An issues paper, a pretty comprehensive one, is going to be released on the 4th of August, and we'll also be launching a consultation and engagement program to go alongside that. But in the meantime, I encourage you to start thinking about the kinds of input that would really help shape the review. So, for example, I'm really keen to hear from you about case studies that show how the Charter was applied in practice, whether it made a positive difference or whether it fell short. Your ideas on how the Charter could better meet the immediate, medium and long-term needs of victim survivors, or any suggestions for improving the format or structure of the Charter itself, particularly ways to make it more accessible, clear and user-friendly. Your insights, whether grounded in lived experience, service delivery, advocacy or policy, are critical to us getting this right. It's a real opportunity to help shape the Charter for all the reasons that victim survivors tell us they need it and that they deserve. And I'm genuinely looking forward to hearing from you all. So thanks so much for that. And we'll make sure that information about the Charter, which is on the website, and the release of that issues paper will come out to all of you. I really appreciate your patience as I went through all of that.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Beck. That was really insightful. I learnt a lot. I was doing a lot of nodding because there was so many issues that you raised that I personally connected with, and as a long-time worker in the community, I'm sure it's felt by all. We have some time if Beck has been lovely enough to stick around to answer some questions. So if you do have some questions for Beck and for the Office of the Victims Commissioner, you're welcome to raise your hand, or you might like to put it in the chat function. I'll have to get some help with the chat function. So preferably raise your hand and ask the question verbally if you're able to do that.
I'm also very happy to take any offline questions and come back to you directly. So please don't feel free to, because I know that I just, I launched a whole lot of information at you, and there's probably a lot to process, but you'll get the slides. If that jogs your memory or you want to write down any questions, I'm very happy to have them directed to me through Charlotte and the team, or through, you can contact me at commissioner@victimscommissioner.qld.gov.au, the longest email in the world, but feel free to contact me directly if you like.
So there's I've just reshared that. There's contact details for your office so people can take note of them. But as Beck said, all of this information will be sent out to you in the next couple of days. So don't feel like you've got to quickly, scramble and write down lots of notes. But yeah, there is time. Okay. Right. So does anybody have any questions about Beck's presentation? Yes, we've got Belinda coming through to us.
Hi, Beck. I'm just wondering if there is going to be a strategy to try and reach those, you spoke about that accessibility, lack of knowledge about the Charter. If there's anything particular, or if there are plans to try and reach those that may not normally be able to have their say. I would imagine that some advocacy from organisations will be a big part of that, but I'm just wondering if there's any other thoughts around that.
Yes, thank you for your question. I really appreciate that. There's a lot that's going to be underway in that space. We're looking at specific engagement strategies. So I have to have particular regard, not only legislatively, but morally and ethically, have to have specific regard to people whose voices are often unheard, or we're accessing their rights and having characteristics that make them more vulnerable to harm. I really need to focus on that. So we are going to have independent strategies in terms of how we're going to engage people. I've also spent the last year doing extensive engagements. I think I've had nearly 300 engagements in the last 11 months all over the state, to build relationships and connections to make sure that when we go out with this information, I'm actually sending it to people who are working on the ground, who are leading communities, so that, and I really think I've been comprehensive in who to connect with to make sure that they are getting this information from me directly. And we're also, with some communities, making sure that I'm getting the advice needed on how to best make this information accessible and relevant. And which I'm trying to think outside the box on a number of things. So the first thing is that you'll see that we're going to have this open for 11 weeks. That's kind of unheard of. Like most times when, government wants you to respond to something, you get 2 weeks to have, a think about it. For a victim survivor, and particularly for the scaffolding they may need around them to be able to contribute, it can take 6 to 8 weeks to get an appointment with a service provider or someone to support them. So I wanted to make sure that we had enough time for people to think, get all the support around them that they might need and advice to be able to effectively contribute in a way that's meaningful for them. I also want to think about different ways, not just written submissions, but could somebody send me a video? Could somebody record their voice? Are there different ways for people to be able to engage does someone want to draw me a picture? Does someone want to do something that helps them communicate the things that they need to tell me to consider? So we're doing as much of that as possible, and also making sure that things are in accessible, easy read format.
Thank you, Beck. I have no doubt that you will go out of your way, but it's lovely to hear all those different ideas and what you're putting forward. Thanks. You've answered my question.
Nina has come through on the chat and said that victims in Mackay and those areas often want a direct place to make an application and require an advocate or other supports to share their story, not just a 1-800 number.
Okay. Is that in regard to making an application for Victims Assist, or is that in terms of registering a complaint? I'm just unsure, Nina. If you wouldn't mind clarifying in the chat, that would be great.
Oh, sorry, I was gonna come online just quickly.
Hi, Nina.
Hello. Because we support people with disability, and if they're victims of crime, often they want to meet someone face to face. You were just talking about other mediums, which I was just about to say were very successful during the Disability Royal Commission, as in having stories, videos, audio recordings or art. So I just mean, in my experience, they do want to often meet with someone to share their injuries, to express their trauma. So yeah, I know the Community Legal Centre, or in years gone by, there had been other agencies where Victims Assist was provided face to face, and I just believe that there is still that need where people just want to share their story face to face, be expressive, all sorts of things. And we do have, particularly in the regions, just so many services via 1-800 numbers, etc., that people tend to still not be overly confident in, let alone comfortable with in using. Don't feel like their full story is being heard.
Yeah, look, that's really valuable feedback and also common feedback. And in terms of being able to provide that, that's very much in terms of accessibility, some of the things that we want to concern ourselves with in terms of people's right to access the supports that they need. Often, though, that's part of the struggle with geography, and I think that that's something that we're definitely, in terms of accessibility, will be a big focus of the review, and we'll absolutely be taking that under consideration. I just want to make it clear, though, that in terms of applications and things like that for Victims Assist, we're very, very different. So I have actually no connection with Victims Assist and the financial support process that is there. So my job, though, is to, and I do receive a lot of feedback around access to services that are there, particularly when someone is impacted like acutely impacted. You know, you're walking along living your best life, and then all of a sudden, you know, your life changes dramatically because you're a victim of serious crime, and we're throwing people into a very confusing, often intimidating process. So my job is to support agencies, and through our own work is to make sure that systems are made simpler to navigate. There is also a commitment from the Queensland Government to design and establish a victim advocacy service, and what that looks like statewide. That's work that's being undertaken by the Department of Youth Justice and Victim Support under Minister Gerber, who is the responsible minister for that initiative. So my understanding is that there's also going to be some consultation about what victim advocacy and navigation support needs to look like. So I'm obviously deeply interested in what that's going to look like as well. But I would really recommend, Nina, that that you also get involved in that, and we can find some information when that becomes available about how you can get involved and what that consultation will look like.
That would be good, like to harness already existing agencies and advocacy agencies. Yeah, I think that I will do that. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nina. You've got some support in the chat function too for your points. Does anybody else have, we've probably got enough time for one or two more questions, depending on how lengthy they may be. Does anybody else have anything to ask Beck that we have her for a small amount of time? Okay. Well, Beck, we've got somebody coming through.
Hi, Ravindra.
You're welcome to go ahead and speak if you have a question, Ravindra.
Well, maybe if technology is not your friend, you might want to put it in the chat.
Yeah.
It's very rarely my friend.
It wasn't my friend today, I tell you that. Oh dear.
Okay, well, maybe you might want to, oh no, here we go.
Ravindra, you can go ahead and speak if you're able to, or you can use the chat function. We've acknowledged that you've got a question. If you've changed your mind, that's fine too. I think we might be having some audio issues.
No problem. Oh no.
Here we go. We can see someone.
Okay.
Hello.
Hello. Now I hope you can hear me now.
I can.
We can hear you.
Okay, thank you. I really appreciate your presentation, and it's really appreciable also. I'm just wondering regarding Pacific Island countries, specifically like Fiji, there is a not such provision. So is it possible like something could be done in Fiji and other Pacific Island countries? Maybe I'm not sure like how this could be like implemented or organized and work in the Pacific Island countries.
Oh, that's a big question, Ravindra. My jurisdiction is just here in Queensland, but there are victims commissioners and charters of victims' rights in in a number of jurisdictions across Australia. So one of the things that might be helpful, I think I do have a document that actually sort of looks at more broadly what happens across Australia. And maybe that might be helpful in terms of looking at some advocacy. Are you based in Fiji?
Yes, I'm based in Fiji and working in collaboration with the Ministry of Education, Social Welfare, Police Department, Correction Department, and other non-government organizations. But those things are very much lacking in Fiji. So that's why, like maybe through DFET, you can like contribute your valuable evaluation, and that would be useful and applicable in the Fiji. That's the
Yeah, well, I'm really happy to take your details if I can do that through Charlotte, and then maybe we could have a conversation. I could just, maybe give you some background information that might help in some advocacy. I'm always up for a trip to Fiji to come and give you a hand if you want to have a conversation. Well, I'm wishful thinking, but certainly happy to have a conversation with you about the progress that's been made here in Queensland and in other jurisdictions across Australia that might be helpful in terms of doing some of that advocacy in Fiji. But I really appreciate you asking.
Thank you so much. So I will text my email address and we may be in touch.
Just put Ravindra, I'll just put my email address in the chat now, and then you are welcome
and then you can send that through to Charlotte.
Me.
Yeah. And thank you, Chloe, for putting that in around the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions.
Yeah. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
No worries. All right, thank you all so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Beck. Thank you so very much for joining us. It's we're very, 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 very sincerely appreciate it. Thank you so much.
All right. See you all later.
Bye, Beck.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye. Okay, so we're on to the next section of our presentation. We are going to be joined by two wonderful staff members of the Wild Sexual Violence Prevention Association. If I can get my slides to work, I'm going to formally introduce them both. So we'll start off with Jane. Jane is a team leader and project worker at Wild Sexual Violence Prevention Association. Jane has worked for Wild for over 10 years, supporting people who have intellectual disability, who have been victim survivors of sexual violence, domestic and family violence, or have had other experiences of crime. Jane's work at Wild has included case management, advocacy, training, crisis support, community education and project management. Jane is currently a senior project worker at Wild and has been the project manager for Listen Up Project and the ACT training project. Both projects focus on the prevention of violence against women and non-binary people who have an intellectual disability through the creation of training and resources co-designed by people who have an intellectual disability. That sounds good. And Victoria, we're also very pleased to welcome Victoria, who is the Practice and Operations Manager and a Senior Trauma Counsellor at Wild. Victoria has worked for Wild for 4 years, prior to which her practice focused on childhood sexual abuse, adverse childhood experiences and complex behaviours in children and in young people. As part of the Wild management team, Victoria contributes to the organisational and strategic direction of the organisation, focusing on trauma-informed best practice for people with intellectual disability. Victoria supports the day-to-day operational activity of the Wild team, providing advice, direction and guidance. She provides specialist trauma counselling to people with intellectual disability who have experienced sexual violence, domestic and family violence, and of course other forms of violent crime. So welcome to Jane and to Victoria. You've got your thing on mute, so if you could unmute and say hello to all of us.
Hi, everyone.
Welcome. We really appreciate your time this morning because I know you are both, as I guess everybody on this chat, very busy, but you have a particularly I guess what would be the word, very specialist, I guess, service. So I'm very interested to hear more about your service and also what you do to support your staff, because it's such a challenging space in which you work. So I'll hand over to you both now, and I'll be the slide person. So just, yeah, if I'm not quick enough, you flag with me and I'll change the slides.
Thank you. We can move straight to the next slide. Thanks, Charlotte. So we would just like to also acknowledge the traditional owners of all the lands that we're meeting today. Jane and I are in the Turrbal and Yagara country of Meanjin. We pay respects to elders past and present, and would just like to acknowledge all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who are living with disability. And the ongoing contribution that they make to the work that we do here at Wild. So we will be discussing sexual violence and other forms of violence, and recognise that that can be distressing, and just ask that you all prioritise your own well-being and take a break or step away if needed. Thank you. So WILD works specifically with people who have an intellectual disability, age 12 and older, of all genders, people who've experienced sexual violence, domestic and family violence, and other forms of violent crime. We have 3 core service areas, which is the Sexual Violence Prevention Program, our Victim of Crime program, and also our project team. So we have a team of counsellors that provide long-term specialist trauma-informed counselling. Our Victim of Crime case managers provide a wide range of supports to people, including the financial application process, but also wide-ranging support and advocacy, and helping clients to assess and develop safety strategies. We run 2 social groups, our long-running women's group and more recent Rainbow Fun Crew. And we periodically run therapeutic groups as well, to support understanding and development around safe relationships, domestic and family violence, and e-safety, things like that. We provide community education and professional training to help broaden understanding of issues faced by people with intellectual disability, and to look at ways of working or adapting practice for people who are also working with people with intellectual disability. And we have the project team who work alongside our peer workers and lived experience experts to develop accessible resources and educational resources. Next slide, please, Charlotte. So why is there a need for WILD? We are a unique organisation, and that we support a very specific demographic of people. Unfortunately, like many marginalised groups, people with intellectual disability do experience rates of violence at a disproportionately high rate. Next, please. So women with disability are twice as likely to experience domestic and family violence than those without disability, and women with intellectual disability specifically are 3 times more likely than women with a physical disability to experience violence. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women who also have a disability experience those rates of violence at an even higher rate, both sexual and domestic family violence. So men with disability, intellectual disability, are also more likely to experience sexual violence, and within domestic relationships experience significantly higher rates of sexual violence, physical violence, and emotional abuse. Next, please. So almost 1/3 of LGBTQI+ young people and people from COLD backgrounds with disability will experience sexual violence and other forms of violence. And for people with moderate and severe levels of disability, the incident rates go up to nearly 4 out of 5 people who will have experience of domestic and family violence in their lifetime. So unfortunately, we have to remember that the figures don't capture all experiences of people living with disability, as a lot of intellectual disability goes unrecognised. And of course, there's all of the unforeseen and unreported violence that's not captured. So we always like to have a little bit of information about what is intellectual disability, because that's our core work that we do here. So it's a condition that's characterised by significant limitations in both intellectual functioning and adaptive behaviour that originates before the age of 22. So intelligence quotient, or what we know as IQ, is one marker of the different levels of intellectual disability, but also there's the equally important adaptive functioning component. So that's 3 domains that consists of conceptual, social, and practical skills that are learned and performed by people in their everyday lives. These adaptive skills cover a wide range of areas, including communication, language, literacy, use of money, keeping and telling of time, memory, interpersonal relationships, social judgment, and social problems, and lots of everyday activities in terms of personal cares and household management. So here at Wild, we have a very strong emphasis on trauma-informed practice, not only in the work that we deliver to our clients, but also how we support each other as a team. Self-care itself is defined as a range of practices and activities that an individual engages in to promote their own overall well-being, and that encompasses physical, mental, and emotional and spiritual health. We believe that self-care is the responsibility of the organisation, to have practices and processes that support self-care in an ongoing and proactive way. Self-care at the workplace should never be the responsibility of the individual. So first and foremost, it's a relational approach where a safe and supportive relationship is needed, in which both formal practices such as good policies and procedures, and then embedded practices, which is like a way of working or the culture of the organisation, work together to create an environment where self-care happens. Jane's going to speak to each of those a bit more.
So when Victoria and I sat down and we started thinking about this presentation, it was really clear to us that the most important aspect of self-care at Wild and supporting our staff is around relationship building. So Victoria talked to an trauma-informed approach, which is the way we work with all people who are accessing our services, but also the way that we build relationships with our staff. So that is relationships that are underpinned by trust, safety, choice, and collaboration. So how do we do this? The first thing that we talked about is purposeful engagement with our staff. So what we mean by this is ensuring that we are trying to build relationships with staff, all of our staff, regardless as to whether we are providing direct supervision or whether we're involved in any ongoing work with our staff. And I would say this is particularly important because you're more likely, obviously, to have those relationships with people you're working alongside day-to-day or supervising. But our management structure is one that we all support everybody. And so we want to be ensuring that we're connecting with people and building relationships so they can come to us and share if they're needing support with work, if things aren't going well in their personal life. And so we can be picking up on signs that they're needing more support. So we provide opportunities for social events at Wild. So often this can be a pizza lunch. We do go out for dinners and things as well. But this isn't an expectation. This is something that people can opt in or opt out of, because we're very aware that for some people, part of their self-care is having quite a clear work-life balance and prioritizing their personal time. So this is, please come if you want to. However, if you don't want to, also fine. So another really important part of building relationships is around reducing power imbalances, whether real or perceived. So we had a really good think around how we do this, because I think we both sort of do it innately, but some of the ways that we do it as a management team is that I think we really respect everybody's professional experience. We have a lot of experience here at Wild, and not just in the management team. We have counsellors with 15 years of counselling. So really admiring and respecting what everyone's bringing at the table. We all share offices. We all answer the phone. We all sit at team meetings together. We all have lunch together. So it's about ensuring that there's an equal playing field, even though there is a management structure in place around supporting staff. Next slide, please, Charlotte. So I think another really important part of the work around supporting staff is acknowledging that the work that we do is really hard. It can be really frustrating. It can be really challenging. However, we do also have wins, and so it's important that we celebrate those as a team. However, we do ensure that we are around accessible and open to those challenging experiences and acknowledging that this is difficult work. it's around an awareness that people who work at Wild or people who work in the trauma sector may have their own experience of violence and or disability. We do employ 3 women at Wild who have an intellectual disability and an experience of domestic and family violence. So at Wild, we understand that people's lived experience of violence they can work with this within their work around the way they relate to people and what they can share in their understanding of how systems and different services approach intellectual disability and experiences of crime. So we want to ensure that people, if they want to share, this is something that they know will be supported within our team culture. We prioritise and allocate time for staff, no matter how busy we are. I think everyone in the management team, which besides Victoria and I also consists of another Victoria and Aunt Gillian, who is our director, we all have another role. Both of the Victorias are counsellors who have caseloads. I'm a project worker. So we are all juggling other things, but it's extremely important to all of us that we are making time, we are accessible. If somebody comes to us and says, hey, can I have a chat with you? I've just had a really difficult phone call. I don't want staff to see that I've got 55 things I need to do today. I want to be shown that I'm here, I can help, tell me what's happening, let's go and have a chat about it. So it's about being accessible, interested and supportive. So people knowing where we are, how they can contact us, having calendars that are clear with where we're going to be. We have a roster around, sometimes we are working with Crisis at Wild where staff might need to check in around domestic and family violence, so they know who they can contact and when. And lastly, I think it's around having a laugh together, having fun. Just all relationships are built on fun and joy and sharing. And we try and do that as well as much as appropriate and within people's own, with what they're comfortable with as well. Next slide. So there are formal practices as well. It's not all laughing and and having pizza. So everyone at Wild has regular monthly strengths-based supervision with a line manager. So this is where we focus on self-care. We have those discussions, workload, reflection and challenges within the work. Everyone is also, or most staff doing direct, I think all staff actually at the moment who are doing direct counselling or casework have the opportunity to engage with an external supervisor outside of Wild. So this is where professional development can be worked on, and this is also paid by Wild. So opportunities for peer learning and reflection. The counselling team and the victim of crime team meet with their supervisors to reflect, to share case studies, to learn from each other. And this is something that feedback has been is really important part of development at Wild, having those opportunities to check in with other staff around how they're going, what are they seeing, sharing and learning together. So it's also around kids. Oh, sorry. I don't know if thank you. Consistent and clear policies. We work with crisis, we work with trauma. A lot of the work is unpredictable at times, particularly when people are disclosing violence. So people need to know what they can expect, what they should be doing, and also have an opportunity to weigh in on those policy and procedures and be a part of that process as well around what's working, what they think needs to happen, to ensure that their expectations are being met and ours as well. Thank you. So we also ensure that we're creating opportunities for diversity and collaboration in the work. So part of a lot of the work we do is community education and training. So really, if we have an inquiry around training, a lot of the discussion we have around this is who's interested in giving it a go, who has capacity, and allowing that opportunity for people who have been doing a lot of direct casework and not a lot of opportunity for anything else to have a go, to practice and develop their skills, and to do that alongside somebody else. So we generally have 2 people doing these sort of activities. We're really aware of worker safety. So that's around their physical safety and emotional. We do outreach work, counselling and victim of crime support. That means our workers are travelling, Caboolture, Logan, Inala out. We've really extended our reach actually in the last couple of years. We're everywhere. So that's around thinking about, for each case, ensuring that we're looking at how the person feels around where they're going to be going and what they're going to be doing. Does there need to be 2 workers? Where are you meeting? And having those discussions on an ongoing basis to ensure that everyone feels safe and supported. We all hold an awareness of vicarious trauma and burnout. And also, I think through our relationships with our staff, able to pick up if that's something that's happening, if they don't feel comfortable to raise that themselves. We have a shared risk policy, so nobody holds risks alone. Please, we really encourage people to come and have a chat with workers, with peers. Sometimes as we said, we all answer the phone, and sometimes you can pick up the phone and be not ready, but be on the phone to someone who is experiencing something either in crisis or experiencing trauma and needing that support to manage that risk. So nobody holds it. Don't go home with it alone. Come and have a chat with someone. We can work out a bit of a plan of attack together. We actually turn the phone off or over to voicemail for an hour a day, which just allows everybody to actually have a lunch break. We were finding that people weren't having lunch breaks, or you're having your lunch break, but you can hear someone saying, oh, Jane's just she'll be back. And of course, you're thinking, who's that? Who's that calling? Should I go on? So just allowing people to actually rest, have a break, go out and get lunch, do what you need to do to look after yourself. And we're hearing that that's been really useful. And that can be, we have it between 12 and 1, but people are encouraged to take lunch whenever it suits them, manage their own time. And a real commitment to reflection and continuous improvement strategies. It's around coming together as a team and looking at things or way we've managed things and thinking, is this the best way we could have done this? What does policy say? Do we need to go back and tweak this? What do staff think? To ensure that we're being the best service that we can be. And because something has worked in the past doesn't mean it's going to always work. We need to be flexible with this. And ensure we're inviting everyone who wants to and has capacity to be involved in these discussions. Thank you. So the embedded practices, so this is sort of a way of working that I don't think is written down anywhere. It's just something that is the way we work at Wild and the way we always have. So that's around being flexible, acknowledging that a lot of the people who work here at Wild are mothers, carers, and have lives outside of work. So that means it might be, I have to come in at 9:30 today because I've got to go and take my child to a doctor's appointment. I've got to go and pick this person up, and being and knowing that that's going to receive a supportive response. We respect people's professional judgment and self-direction. So allowing staff to manage their time, their days, their workload with our support, but we absolutely allow that freedom in the work. We work with trauma. We are likely to get sick. And so we want people to feel comfortable to say, look, tell us when you're sick, have a day off, rest. This is really important to ensure, to look after our staff, so ensure when they are here, they can do the best work that they can. Self-care days are welcomed. I know in myself, I start to feel it. If I'm getting sick, I can feel it. If I'm feeling like I need a break. And so I'm, and knowing that I can say, look, and looking at my calendar and saying, look, this week I've got a bit of a quiet week. I need to take a break. Otherwise I can feel myself getting sick is really important. And the doorway chats. We do this a lot at Wild, and you probably do it at your service where you sort of lean in and just see who's on the phone and say, are you free? I just had this really difficult phone call. Have you got 5 minutes? And that can be with obviously someone from the management team, but with peers as well. And knowing that that is something that's really encouraged, but that's the way we support each other, is knowing that you can just go in and say, have you got 2 secs? I'm sitting with me. I just need to have a chat with someone. Thank you. So supporting everyone as a team. So that is stepping in if someone's sick. We have a weekly Wednesday group that has social groups pretty much all day. And so often we're needing people to step in where someone's sick or have other doing casework or whatnot. But then knowing as well that it's okay to say, actually, I'm at capacity this week. I can't do that, and know that that's going to be respected. it's okay to say you're at capacity. And actually, I think this is work that sometimes needs to be built in and maybe discussed in supervision, particularly for people who want to be doing all the things and providing all the support and supporting all the team, but then don't have the time to do it. It's around supporting them to say, hey, look, I appreciate you put your hand up to do that, but I also see that when are you going to have lunch on this day? When's that going to happen? So having those discussions with people as well. And so overall, we want to be creating an environment that where challenges are just as welcome as successes.
So I was just reading that comment.
Oh yeah, we got distracted.
Yeah, we are incredibly lucky here at Wild to have the philosophy that we have, and it's really about being proactive, and it's rather than reactive, because like Jane said, you are going to get sick, you are going to have tough days, but coming in at that early end and is the way to manage self-care. So
yeah.
Next slide, please. Do you want me to take over?
Yeah.
So very quickly, we're just going to plug resources. If you haven't seen our website, there are loads and loads of really great resources, accessible videos, animations, documents that are all developed in collaboration with lived experience experts. So if you are working with someone with intellectual disability, some of these might be helpful in your practice.
Thank you.
So that's it from us. Thank you.
Thank you both very much for that, and good timekeeping as well. We started a little bit late, so you did really well. I was looking at that time. I really appreciate the fact that you shared such practical examples and relatable examples for what people can take away if they're not doing already in their own organisations. And I think, and I don't know if anybody else has experienced this, but before this job, I was working in the community sector for a couple of decades, and I've noticed a real significant shift in terms of how self-care has become a very prominent part of day-to-day and policy in every organisation, because it used to be a sort of a feeling of that you cared more if you sort of sacrificed yourself and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And I'm so very glad that this is changing, especially for all the sort of younger, new people leaving uni or wherever and coming through into the workforce, that this is an equally important part, because, there's people used to talk about it, but not with the sincerity and that there is now. And it's really a part of, the day-to-day sort of dynamics of the workplace. So it's really encouraging. And as I said, wonderful practical examples that you both utilise at Wild. So I hope that people have, taken some great examples away. We have a little bit of time for a couple of questions. If people have anything burning that they would like to ask Victoria and Jane. So I'll just sort of, we've got a So we've just got to thank you for coming through from Lisa. I'll read it out because when people watch this later, they can't see the chat. So I'll just, Lisa has said, thank you so much. I supported a young lady with intellectual disability to access your service over 2 decades ago. In my time as a disability support worker, I have referred many people to Wild over the years. You do such important work. Thank you again. So that's nice. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you.
Does anybody else have a quick question? Because we've got a couple of minutes remaining and I have to beg you for feedback for this wonderful webinar as well. So, oh, here we go. Alicia says, I am a FSS in Gold Coast. Would I be able to refer my clients to Wild? Is that family support service? Sorry, Alicia, or sorry, I'm not familiar with the FSS. Please, someone, if they can help me with what FSS stands for, but I think it's family support or
Service, family support service.
something. Yep.
Yeah. So to answer your question, so if the person has an intellectual, sorry, I just got just
family support
specialist
in the DVV sector, DFV sector.
Yeah, so we don't provide case management support on the Gold Coast. However, we do have an outreach counselling location in Beenleigh, would probably be the closest to the Gold Coast. So counselling, yes, we could support. Vox support, the furthest we sort of go down that way is Logan. However, we can provide support over the phone around, if that's around looking at something with a bit of a disability lens, or providing counsellors often connect with other counsellors in more of a supervisionary sort of setting to provide support. So that's another way we could support as well. Yeah, so counselling, but it would have to be in Beenleigh.
Thank you. And Alicia's just said, amazing, thank you. Referring clients to counselling is a barrier at the moment, so it is good to know. Thank you, Alicia.
Yeah, but there's very long wait lists in the sector at the moment.
Anybody else? Got a couple of minutes. Well, if you do think of something, I'm just going to quickly thank my very special guests today. We had Beck O'Connor, and obviously we've got Jane and Victoria with us right now. And a reminder that we will be sending out all the links and information and some extra resources as well in the email that will follow this event. So again, don't be concerned that you might have missed something, or maybe you joined a little bit late. All the information will be sent out to you. Now, here's my time to shine. We have these webinars, and we would love to get feedback. So I'm making a special point to do a big call out now. If you can take the time to, at some point, the link will be available too in the email that we send out. But if you could take the time just to let us know how we did and that sort of thing. The link to the SurveyMonkey Sarah's just shared that in the chat as well. So if you could take the time to, it only takes like 1 or 2 minutes to share your thoughts, that would be very much appreciated. And as I said, it will come out in the email as well. Thank you. That's all I wanted to pay special attention. I just wanted to, again, sort of draw your attention to the fact that we're having our conference later this year. And sorry, my slides have got a mind of their own. So please feel free to explore and get some more information about that wonderful conference on our website. We'll also, if you are follow us on LinkedIn, we've also been sharing some update about, keynote speakers and things like that. So we strongly encourage you to have a look at that. So again, thank you so much to Victoria and to Jane and to the wonderful Beck O'Connor for joining us this morning. Yes, valuable insights and information to the community. And I would like to thank you all for joining us today as well, because it is, very important to share this information and join together as a community to support human rights respecting practice. So thank you to all of you who joined me and everybody today. Thank you so much.